A very good evening and welcome to all the participants to this 29th conversation on ICFAI's Wise Use Interactive Webinar Series. I'm sure all of you have had a very good Diwali and I'm sure it is still going on. At various parts in the country and the world, I'm sure Deepavali is being celebrated now in a big way and in some places in a noisy way. We can still hear the sound of crackers, but I would request as ever to mute your mics so that we have some freedom and ease to discuss, and all of us will be able to listen to what the esteemed guest is speaking. So let me welcome Mr. Leo Fernandez to this webinar series. Thank you very much, Mr. Leo, for accepting to speak in our webinar. And I'm eagerly looking forward to learn from some of the tips and some of the suggestions that you're going to give as part of this, how to find purpose in our journey of career building. So thank you very much. And I also welcome our Honorable Vice Chancellor, Professor Mahendra Reddy, who has just joined. Welcome, sir. And we are about to begin. Ladies and gentlemen, I take pride and pleasure in introducing the guest today. Let me share my screen. Finding Purpose, the journey from campus through career. Our esteemed speaker today, Mr. Leo, is right here with us, and we are eagerly looking forward to understand some of the lessons that we can take up as part of this conversation. The agenda for the webinar is very simple. The first 30 minutes will be a talk delivered by Mr. Leo Fernandez, and the next 30 minutes will be the Q&A session moderated by my esteemed colleague, Professor Prasad, and I. This is handsome Mr. Leo Fernandez here with us. Mr. Leo Fernandez is currently the CEO and also the co-founder of Talent Ease. He's extremely passionate about what is called creating tomorrow's leaders today, which is also the mantra of his organization, Talent Ease. Previously, Mr. Leo held esteemed positions in various organizations like Accenture Singapore. He was partner and managing director there, running outsourcing businesses across Asia Pacific region. He was also with Habit, India Life, and the Tata Group. All along, his strengths have been creating and building high-performance teams, multicultural teams, and turning around business operations. In the 20-year corporate career, which was largely in leadership positions, heading businesses in India and in the Asia Pacific region, he has contributed to the growth of industry, and he has also picked up several leadership lessons, which we are going to listen to currently. After 8 years in Singapore, as I said earlier, he returned to India to pursue his dream of working with children and young adults. Talent Ease, a little bit about Talent Ease, which works with children and young adults on leadership skills and values, especially through year-round programs integrated into the school and college curriculum. I think Talent Ease has so far run over 1 million impact sessions for children, and also works with school and college leadership, educators, teachers, parents on transforming how schools and parents. Talent Ease works with children and young adults, and they have conducted a large number of programs working with the educators, teachers, and parents together. And they have trained so far about 10,000 of them, and trying to transform how schools and parents can better prepare today's children to lead successful and meaningful lives tomorrow. Mr. Leo regularly authors the Leaders Speak column for the prestigious Business Line on campus edition, and has been a jury member for the India Fund Fest, one of India's most successful funding competitions. He also enjoys traveling, writing, and watching movies. And he has been recommended by my friends in the Hindu Business Line, Mr. Vinay Kamath and Mr. Navneet. I thank both of them for recommending such a wonderful guest for our webinar. Thank you, both of you, if you're on the show, and we would like to have more of such recommendations in the days and weeks to come. And I will also introduce my co-moderator, Professor R. Prasad. Is a professor and post mentor. He is an alumnus of IIT Mumbai and IIM Kolkata. He has about 3 decades of rich experience in teaching and research, and also in the corporate side. He was an entrepreneur, and His rich experience will be seen in the way it is moderated, in the questions that he's asking, and in the summarization of the bullet points and the takeaways today. Welcome, Professor Prasad, for this webinar. Thank you. And now I would like to request the esteemed guest, Mr. Leo Fernandez, to begin the session by delivering his talk. You have 30 minutes, Mr. Leo, and I'm sure that is enough, as we discussed earlier. And we are all eagerly waiting for the initial talk. After that, we will start the Q&A right away. So thank you, and over to you.
Thank you. Thank you so much, and a good evening to everyone on the webinar. Delighted to be on, and thank you very much to ICFAI, Mr. Sudhakar Rao, Professor Prasad, and all the staff for having me over. The Vice Chancellor's on, thank you so much. And a big thank you to Mr. Navaneet and Mr. Vinay Kamath for referring me to this program. Very happy to see how consistently this program has been running, and that it's in some way spreading what we genuinely believe in, which is leadership learning, and particularly among both students as well as alumni and young executives. So thank you so much for having me on. I'm just going to quickly share screen so that we have a few slides that we can use for our reflection this evening. So I'm very delighted with the choice of the theme that we have, which is about finding purpose and straddling both campus and career. And I think that's important because some of us are very lucky to find that purpose when we are right on campus itself, and some of us find it later on in our careers. And I think this is an extremely important journey for each one of us to be able to undertake. I'll begin sharing some of the triggers that were for me useful in discovering my own purpose. And I think one of the most important was Jim Collins' 3 circles. I'm sure some of you are familiar with the 3 circles that Jim Collins often talked about, where the first circle is proficiency, the second circle is passion, and the third is purpose. So we often find in just one second. So I think this whole journey of purpose does not happen by accident. I think the first thing for all of us to understand, if we want to choose lives of purpose, is that we have to ask that question. We have to ask ourselves that very, I would say, difficult question to answer, which is, what is the purpose of my life? And I think when Jim Collins put that structure together of proficiency, passion, and purpose, personally for me, it was a great framework to look at and ask myself, where am I spending most of my time? Do these 3 circles overlap? So I think, of course, the ideal is when all 3 circles overlap. When your passion, your purpose, and your proficiency overlap, then I think, as he put it, you're in the sweet spot, you're in the sweet zone. And I think that's a good question for us to begin with as we ask ourselves whether we are living lives of purpose right from our campus days. Am I able to combine my strengths with what I'm passionate about? And in some way, is that leading me to discover what is my purpose? I think clearly no overlap is bad. If all the 3 circles have no overlap at all, I still remember my son's pediatrician, who she gave him his first jab, and she wielded the injection like it was a murder weapon. And I remember my son's vaccination spot, his whole thigh ballooned to twice or thrice the size. And for me, when speaking to her, it was quite obvious because she had no interest in being a doctor. She spent no time, she'd wanted to be something else, but because of parental pressure, she went ahead and was a doctor. And clearly in her case, she was just going through the motions. So clearly all 3 circles were definitely far apart. No overlap between proficiency or passion or purpose. It's a good thing, I think, for some of us when 2 circles overlap. If we are able to find that passion and proficiency overlap, that's a great beginning. If for some of us we have passion overlapping with what we think is our purpose, then we can build the other. In some way, I would suggest that my Talentees journey was a little bit of 2 circles. I think in some way, education as a sector, working with children, I really had no proficiency in it. But when I saw that I had a passion for it and that it could possibly be my purpose, then gradually you tell yourself that, yes, I can develop the proficiency. So I think it's a good idea for us to ask ourselves if two circles overlap, and if I can then work towards getting the purpose circle into my life. What I have discovered, and I think this is true of many people, both in the corporate world and outside, is that your proficiency kind of gives your life 3x power. If you're able to build skills, if you're able to build depth in your proficiency, then you really are able to get a 3x kind of impact in your life if you treat that seriously. Passion, I think, immediately makes it 5x. I think if you're able to bring passion to what you do, that you're not just good at it, but you're very passionate about it, you get 5x kind of power. But purpose, I think, is 10x. I think with purpose, if really the blessed few amongst us, the lucky few amongst us who are able to find the purpose circle, I think we get a 10x impact in our life. And that really is what all of us, whether students or those in our career, are looking for. How do we go ahead and proceed down that journey of finding our purpose or reiterating our purpose if we have already discovered some clues to it? I'm going to spend this brief reflection time on 3 things that I think are useful steps to discovering my purpose: values, relationships, and impact. I believe that these 3 things are possible pathways to each one of us asking that important question and finding some answers to what is the purpose and how can I have a more purposeful life, a purposeful career, and a purposeful everyday. So I'll begin with values. I think for me, values is what makes the difference between whether we are pilgrims or nomads. I think we know the difference between these two. A pilgrim moves ahead with a clear destination in mind. A nomad can wander around. I always was very inspired by Peter Drucker's famous article, on knowing yourself, the self-knowledge article that he wrote. And I love that quote which he had there, which is, he was an asset manager, a successful asset manager, doing very well. But he said, I realized that what I valued was people. And I saw no point in being the richest man in the cemetery. So I think it's important for us to understand that values is not the same as ethics. Ethics is different. Ethics, we understand integrity, the mirror test, as Drucker would call it. But values really is what defines this purpose circle. I would suggest that my skills define my proficiency circle. My interests could define my passion circle. But my purpose is what creates, my values are what create my purpose circle. Because once I understand what my values are, those values drive my choices. They create my priorities. And as most of us know, these 2 things are what end up shaping our lives and how we spend it, how we spend our time. Because when we have our choices and our priorities clear, then we understand how we use our talents and time as a resource. I think more than anything else, it is what we value that dictates these choices. Just going back to a few personal, stories through my own life of discovery. I remember when my son, Marcus, was born, the next day I left the hospital and headed off on a business travel trip because it was important to close a business deal. Looking back, that was something that was important and that I valued. But by doing that, I was not there for my wife when she had to come home. And I remember my 3 brothers lifting my wife up in the chair because we lived in a multi-story building with no lift. And I wasn't there for that. And I think that reflecting on that helped me understand where I had made a wrong choice because of, in some way, maybe a mistaken sense of duty, of valuing that this is important to do, but in the process, missing out on something that should have been more valuable. Similarly, my daughter, I remember she was in hospital, sick with pneumonia. And again, I was on a flight to close what was at that time the largest deal we had ever signed in my corporate career life. And I remember the plane having a lot of turbulence as we were heading off, to the point where many of us on the flight thought this plane is going to crash. And I remember asking myself that question, that if this plane crashed, what would I regret? Not getting the multi-million-dollar deal or not being there at my daughter's side? And the answer was very clear to me and helped me in my journey to my second life. So I think as we recognize what our values are, we know what to say no to. I think very often we think that purpose comes from what you say yes to, but I also think the power of purpose in our lives comes from what we say no to. I know of a good friend of mine who does a lot of good work, especially helping out poor families, but also on the business side is not averse to cutting corners, earning money in what we could call the shortcut way. And I often used to tell him that you can't build the Taj Mahal and work in the coal mines at the same time. You've got to say no to one if you really have to have purpose in your life. So I think that bit about, 1 second, I'm just trying to move the up. We find, as Clayton Christensen would say, that you find it's easier to stick with your principles 100% of the time rather than 98% of the time. A beautiful article which he had written, how will you measure your life? And I think that quote always stayed with me, because the values that we have determine that I'm not going to do certain things. I will say no to certain things so that the yes has more power in my life, whether it's in my choice of career, whether it's my choice of how I will accelerate in that career, grow in that career. I think it's both the yeses and the nos that become important, and values dictate how I will make those choices and how I will determine those priorities. So my own personal, shall I say, purpose discovery journey happened when I decided to quit my corporate life, come back to India, and start Talentees. I remember many colleagues saying you're wandering from the path. You're very successful in the corporate world, and now you're wandering from that path. And this sentence from Tolkien came to me: not all those who wander are lost. So we started off, I think, with the hypothesis. In terms of my purpose, I felt that I could best contribute on the basis of certain hypotheses which I had. One was that I felt most problems in the world were because at their root, there was a lack of leadership. So I felt that, all the big problems in the world, whether it's poverty, whether it's climate change, whether it's corruption, whether it's violence against women, all these problems exist and are aggravated at its root because of a lack of leadership. And when I say lack of leadership, I'm not talking just about political leaders or business leaders. I'm talking about leadership in the home, leadership in the classroom, leadership in the office. So everyday leadership. And that was the hypothesis. And I believe that that leadership needs to be created early through a prepare job in school rather than a repair job in the workplace. So with that in mind, we went ahead and started working with young children on leadership skills and values. And that for me became what I said I will dedicate this phase of my life to combining what I thought were proficiencies to what I was passionate about with what I felt was my purpose. And that ended up being helping children learn about collaboration, confidence. Here you have a group of children taking a pledge to respect women, because one of the inspirations for Talentees was when the Nirbhaya incident happened. And we felt that the best way to make that difference is if we can convince young men and women that respect for women is a key value that they must build right from their early childhood years. So young people across all the sessions that we have take a pledge to respect women. And that's been one of the most meaningful things that I've found. So I found this purpose in these kinds of golden moments. This young girl, for instance, meditating in a session of ours, the Light Lives program that we have, where we looked at our for-profit business and ensured that it could create resources for us to power the same leadership work at orphanages and low-income schools. So through Light Lives, we reach out at orphanages, teaching children about leadership skills and leadership values, even bringing students from overseas universities, for example, these from the UK, and these students from National University of Singapore to come and make a difference with children on the ground. So if I had to summarize that portion of my journey, I would say that in some way, values created for me the power of and. This picture is one of my favorites. I use it to say that India is the only country in the world where we can cool 2 rooms with 1 air conditioner and a pair of trousers. And I think that's what I discovered in my purpose journey, is that when you choose the values right, when you discover what your values are, you are able to harness the power of and rather than, as Collins would put it, fall to the tyranny of or. And one of my role models was Dr. Govindappa Venkatesamy, Dr. V as he is known, of Aravind Eye Hospital. His purpose statement was very clear. How can my work make me a better human being and make a better world? And I really remember being inspired by both his life and the questions he chose to ask himself. So if you look at what Tim Brown says about him, throughout his purpose journey, he kept questioning all the or statements and really discovered the power of and. And I think that's what all of us will discover if we choose to ask ourselves this question: what are my values? Will release us from some of the shackles of the or statements, that I can either do this or do this. I need to be doing this, in my career, which means I can't do all these other things. So I think that invitation to the and comes by asking ourselves what our values are. I think what you also discover in a purpose full life and a purposeful career is that you have to be committed to growth. I think that's the question you have to ask yourself, whether you're a student on campus. Am I going to be committed to growth? I spoke about pilgrims and nomads. One of the tragedies I see in life is now that I've been around in the work world for a while, I can reflect on times when I met young people who started out with a lot of fire in their belly, a lot of dreams, a lot of vision to make a difference. And then somehow when I meet them 15, 20 years later, they've settled down. They've got comfortable, they've got used to the perks, the fancy cars, staying in fancy hotels, or the foreign holidays, and they've just got comfortable. And in some way, there seems to be, even though they've got all the frills in place, some emptiness that I see in their eyes, because that voice that was there early on, they chose not to listen to it and to settle down, to stop growing. I often give the example of the 2 employees, one who was promoted and the one who wasn't. And the one who wasn't goes to the boss and asks, why wasn't I promoted? We both have 10 years of experience. And the boss says, yes, he has 10 years of experience. You have 1 year of experience 10 times. And there's a big difference between those 2 things. And I think for many of us, if we don't ask this values question, if we don't ask this purpose question, we can settle into autopilot. We can settle into almost subconsciously running on a treadmill, where we are going through the motions of our career, running meetings, meeting deadlines, achieving sales targets, closing deals. But somehow we sense that we are not really growing. We're not really a different person from who we were the previous year. So I think that commitment to growth is an important value in order, if we choose to ask ourselves that I want a purpose-filled life. In the interest of time, I'm not going to kind of run through all these points, but early on, one choice that I had to make was right after finishing my MBA, when I had a choice of 2 jobs, one which was paying a lot more than the other, and one where I saw more opportunity for growth, both in terms of the challenge that it would give me. It would push me outside my comfort zone. And I'm glad I chose it. I chose the job that was the lower paying job in that first decision that I had to make in my career. And I've never regretted it. I think that choice for growth that I made played a big role in discovering my purpose and trying to stay true to that purpose. So I would suggest that for all of us, as we grow through campus to career, and as we ask ourselves, what kind of purpose I want to have in my life, I think this choice for growth, or the commitment to growth, is an important choice for each one of us to make. The second bit is about relationships. And I'll begin by saying marry right, because I've been very blessed to have got that, been right. So I think my wife is my hero, my role model. And I think it's extremely important to get that decision right. Very often young people who are choosing to get married don't give that decision the importance that it deserves. We spend a lot of time planning for our careers, but many young people don't spend enough time thinking about who they're going to marry. And I would say that's for a purposeful life, for a purposeful career, I would say one of the biggest decisions is who your life partner is and whether both of you share values. If the values of the two of you are aligned, I think that contributes to a purposeful career and a purposeful life, like few other things in the mix. I would also say that, when we choose lives of purpose, we will automatically choose purposeful people. You will find that you gravitate to purposeful people. And I would suggest that if I'm in a discovery of my purpose, that I automatically make friends with a lot of people who are purposeful people. Because being in their company, being in the company of purposeful people, I think helps discover my own purpose in life. I start asking the right questions. I choose reflections, mirrored by the conversations I'm having with them. So I think it's important for us, if we have to live purposeful lives, that we've got to ask this question. What is the quality of the relationships in my lives? What is the impact of the choices I make on relationships? Very often as we accelerate through our careers, we don't pay enough attention to this. I give the example of a couple. Husband works the night shift, wife works the day shift. For many years, I think the only time it's a little bit like Twilight Zone. They just have a few minutes in the overlap where they get to meet each other, say hi, but they're too tired. And I think what happens with those kinds of challenges is that we end up after a few years discovering that this important relationship in our life, we have not nurtured, we have not paid attention to. I think it was Brian Dyson in one of his commencement speech talks, I think, who spoke about the 5 balls that all of us are juggling in our lives: work, family, friends, health, and spirit. And he spoke about the fact that all of us are juggling these 5 balls, but work is a rubber ball. If you drop it, it will bounce back. But the other 4 are glass balls. And if we drop them, they will severely be damaged. They are nicked, they are scuffed in really very often irretrievable ways. And for us to have purposeful lives, I think we should ask this question: what is the priority I give to the relationships in my life? To family, to friends, to children. I think as Mohammed Arian, I'm sure many of you have heard that anecdote of him sharing how he finally decided to quit PIMCO. And those of you know PIMCO, and recall this incident. The media was putting out the story that L. Arian was really quitting because he had disagreements with Bill Gross, the PIMCO founder. But he shared that the trigger was really a conversation with his 10-year-old daughter, whom he was having a conversation about brushing her teeth, and she was not listening, and he asked her why. And she went into her room and brought back a list of the times that he had missed being there for her. He had missed being at a Halloween parade, her opening school day. So several important lists. She made a whole list of 20 things, important times in her life that he wasn't around. And he said that was a wake-up call, that while he had accelerated in his career, earned a lot of money, he had neglected important relationships. And I think that is really a key part if we have to live purposeful lives. The third is about impact. And again, I'm spending less time on these so that we can stay within time. But I think what all of us discover if we want to live lives of purpose is that we are asking ourselves this question constantly. Make a difference, what I call the MAD quotient. Am I making a difference here? Whether it's in my team at work, whether it's in the home, whether it's in the residential community I'm at. Every time I think people of purpose are asking this question, am I making a difference here? Between the pre and post of my interaction with these people, have I contributed in some way to making a positive difference? I think also about impact, what the samurai used to call a distant view of close things. What I mean by that is purposeful people are constantly looking at both microscope and telescope. They're looking through both, asking themselves, is this important just in the short term, or is this something that long term will make a difference? And in my case, I found this an important question, that I asked myself whether I was prepared to sacrifice things in the short term that would help me be more purposeful and more impactful in the long term. And I will suggest that most of us on our purpose journey will also find that we have to juggle these two things, microscope and telescope, if we really have to live purposeful lives. What we should guard against when we are busy with our careers, if we are at campus busy with our studies, is that activity is not equal to impact. I often use this example of the FIFA World Cup in 2018, where you had some of the top teams that literally possessed the ball for the majority of the time. Germany with 67%, Spain 69% possession, Argentina 64% possession. And yet all those three teams were knocked out of the tournament, less than 15 goals, knocked out of the tournament, defeated by lower ranked teams. You had teams like Uruguay, Sweden, Croatia, who really were able to make an impact. So it was not about possession. It was not about, am I busy, but am I making an impact? I think that really is the kind of question that we should close with. One of my favorite authors, Henry Nguyen, talks about the difference between being successful and fruitful. I think what we find when we pursue our careers is that sometimes we chase the labels that other people have set out as success. Have you got promoted? What's the CTC like? What are the perks like? How are we viewed in the corporate circles, by peers, by bosses? And we almost unconsciously chase the success goal, the success metrics, and don't ask whether we are truly being fruitful. Is my example, what I'm saying, what I'm doing every day in the workplace, does it have some sign value? Is it causing others to reflect on their lives of purpose? Is it causing others to behave differently, to change some belief systems, to be more impactful in their circles? So I think that is something that we will discover as we ask ourselves the purpose question. So a few closing thoughts before we wind up and discuss the into some questions. I think one important trigger when reflecting on purpose for me came a few years ago when one of my uncles passed away. Now, as Christians, we normally bury our dead, but this uncle was very clear that he wanted to be cremated. And I remember being in the front seat of the car after the cremation, and I was handed this pot with his ashes, that small clay pot. And on that long drive to immerse the ashes, I was reflecting on this person's life. He was famous, rich in some terms, a lot of what you would call success parameters. And yet there I was sitting with just one small pot. And that was a very reflective journey for me, because at the end of it, we're going to ask ourselves, what did I leave behind? And that's why I go to the question of, how will I know that I'm living a life of purpose? I think partly the answer will come from whether I'm asking myself whether I'm giving and not count what I'm getting. Give the example of two Gujaratis, Hardik Pandya, who was recently on Instagram flaunting his 5 crore watch. And the story that I like about Gandhi, who, when he was sitting on the door of the train as it was chugging at full speed through some of the towns, accidentally one of his slippers fell off. Now, I think the instinctive reaction of most of us will be to hold on to our other slipper, but Gandhi instinctively threw his second slipper down. And when someone asked him, why did you do that? He said, the poor person who finds my slipper will now have a pair that he can use. So I think for us, if we can choose to define our lives by what we get, or we can choose to define our lives by what we give. The second I would say is for us to move fast, whether in campus or career, but slowly. And by that I mean reflectively. A South African friend of mine used to talk about how the mountaineers, the porters would often urge mountaineers, keep using this term, pole, pole, slow down, because they realize that those who are going to reach the peak of the mountain will do so only if they move fast, slowly. I think a few sessions ago, you had Mr. Navneet, the CEO of the Hindu, and he shared briefly about some of the reflections that he does at the end of the year to slow down and ask yourself, where is my life heading? To just get off the treadmill and ask, what are the things that are important in my life? I do the same thing at the end of the year. I ask friends and family, what should I start? What should I stop? What should I continue doing? So that I'm leading some, taking that pause moment to reflect and ask yourself if you're truly living out your purpose. Third, I think you often find that purposeful people, we would tend to be more internally motivated than externally motivated. External motivations will mean less and less, and we will do things more and more from a sense of purpose and a sense of excellence that comes from within. I think a fourth sign of living a life of purpose is that, as Richard Hadley would say, I never feel tired, only pleasantly weary. And I think we'll find that when we are living lives without purpose, we tend to be very fatigued. We tend to be tired. But lives of purpose infuse us with some energy, with enthusiasm, and a certain joy. Closing to, I think for those of us who are pondering whether to make important switches or decisions, it is important to ask ourselves whether life is just an infinite elongation of a straight line, doing the same thing every day, doing the same, meeting the same kind of people, creating the same kind of impact, or to ask ourselves whether we can live our lives differently. As the Tom Cruise movie, they had a lovely one-liner, Night and Day, the movie was. It was, someday is code for never. And I think for those of us who say that someday I will follow my purpose, it's good to, wake ourselves up and say that let's stop postponing it for someday and ask ourselves if we can discover our purpose and make some decisions which will help us live that life of purpose. For me, this is a little sentence that I carry with me right through the day in my back pocket or in my backpack, that God has created me to do him some definite service, some work which he has not given to another. I have my mission. I am a link in a chain, a bond of connection between persons. He has not created me for naught. I shall do good. I shall do his work. I shall be an angel of peace, a preacher of truth in my place. Thank you so much for your time. Thank you for listening. I hope some of the sharings from my own journey and reflections will be useful in your journey of discovery to a purposeful life and career.
Thank you, Mr. Leo Fernandez. This is an amazing session. I think your talk has greater depth and also some of the interesting anecdotes and personal examples that you reflected on, both from your own family as well as from your workplaces, and also from some of the best authors who have shared their life lessons and also lessons from the corporate world. I think it's an amazing talk, and the framework that you have started with in terms of the proficiency, the passion and the purpose, and subsequently how you delineated the whole purpose, because that's very, very important and very difficult to understand. I think you have very clearly explained the role of values, relationship, and the impact with all the examples that you have shared with us. I think very, very interesting points that we have gathered. We are eagerly looking forward to the Q&A session, but what stuck to me while listening to you are a few things, and those are, I don't want to waste a lot of time here, but I just pick up the power of and. I mean, that's very, very powerful. It's not just useful to some of the freshers in the campus. Sometimes, the themes and the titles of these webinars, they think that they are skewed towards freshers, but it's not. They're useful to people across different levels of leadership and with different tenure of work experience. It is so valuable to me. It is so valuable, I'm sure, to many others also. How to harness the power of and how to unshackle yourself from the or statements. I think that's where a lot of clarity would come with respect to defining what is purpose. And when you get purpose, as you rightly mentioned, the impact that you will create is 10x in your journey. So thank you very much. And there are many points, and I'm sure all of us are reflecting and are getting up to ask you the questions. I would now invite Professor Prasad to start the moderation. Professor Prasad, as I mentioned to you all, he's the professor and mentor for the latest online MBA program that we have launched, and he has architected this fully online MBA program. We launched it a few months back. It's doing extremely well. It is ranked number 2 in the top 25 online MBA programs, very recently published by Careers 360. Over to you, Professor Prasad. Thank you.
Thank you, Professor Rao. I think you've brought up a great introduction, as I may call it, Mr. Leo. I'm remembered of a small story. It comes in the normal, moral science kind of thing that we do in school. And it's about a person who prays to God to make him very wealthy. And then he wakes up one day and then God tells him, you run, and whatever land you cover in the day is yours, provided you come back. And the story goes on that this guy realizes at about 3 o'clock, by which time he's already past half time, that he could not, and then he collapses on the way back. And what I'm trying to connect here is that from what I've heard from your background, as well as what you have mentioned right now, somewhere along the line, it is not turning back, but you turned in terms of how your life went. You were going in a straight line to infinity, and then you turned. The direction is not 2 or 3 here, but it's far more complex than that. So the first question that I have is, how do you recollect your life journey from a student to a professional, and how do you connect to this the whole background of purpose and the turning which you took? This is the first question.
I would again reiterate the importance of values, and I must credit my parents and my brothers and the home that I grew up in. That a strong sense of values was always built in. And I think the importance that was constantly dinned into our heads is that a principle is only a principle when you're prepared to pay the price for it. Otherwise, it's just a soundbite. For me, I had always wanted to work with children, young adults, but I told myself I'll do that after I retired. I think it's that look yourself in the mirror moment when you ask yourself, is this a genuine conviction, or is it going to be just something you will do from convenience? So for me, to your question about turning, I think those were some of the moments when I was really looking myself in the mirror and saying, am I going to make a choice of convenience to do this when it's convenient to do, or will I do it from conviction, which means I may have to pay a price for it. I may have to pay a small price for it. At the time, it looked like a very big price, but I think looking back, I discovered it wasn't such a big price because I gained so much in terms of the meaning that you get from a purposeful life. So I would say the grounding, I would suggest, came from the home and the emphasis on values, that you could have all the money in the world, but if you're not living a life grounded in values and making a difference to others around you, then in some sense, you're living a life of, I wouldn't say emptiness, but getting to emptiness. So I think that played an important decision. And I think finally the turning came from asking myself, convenience versus conviction. I hope I answered your question.
Yeah, I mean, this is a very good framework to think about and to reflect on, which I will lead into the next question,
Sure.
Which is a bit more specific. You did in your presentation mention some certain decision-making criteria. I mean, as I saw it, first is no is as important as yes. Second is, prepare versus repair. The third is the or and the and the fourth is, am I committed to growth? Now, with respect to your personal life, can you illustrate, I mean, the way it actually went for us to understand? Because, this purpose thing, a lot of people find it a little away from them. I mean, they think it is philosophy. They think it is abstract. A lot of people around, I mean, they don't realize it the way it should be realized. And somewhere along the line, our communication also needs to be strong enough to pass it on. So in that context, may I request you to reflect on how actually you implemented all this in that curvature, in that turning that you took?
Yeah,
specifics.
Yeah, perhaps I can use an example. So there was a colleague of mine who had to make a choice between two roles, and he was gravitating towards one role, which as his mentor, I felt was not the right one for him. So I sat him down and asked him, and he said, look, this is the role that's going to accelerate me to partner managing director. If I take this path, I'm going to accelerate. And I told him, don't do that. Don't make a choice based on what's going to get you promoted fast. And we looked at the other role where he was extremely sure that he would make a massive impact. Eventually, he chose that role. So I would, and eventually he did become a partner managing director, because that path did lead to that. But the reason I'm using that example is when I talk about commitment to growth, I would often ask myself, when there's an assignment or a business operation or a country that many people are avoiding, don't want to take. There's so much of bad news about a particular deal that no one wants to touch it. I found that I would gravitate to that. I would say, I'm ready to do that because, okay, I may pay some kind of a price, but there is an opportunity for me to make a difference here because it's in bad shape. And I think those small choices in my journey kind of prepared me for the big decision. So the habit of saying that, okay, I'd rather take the commitment to growth choice rather than the convenient choice or the one that is just going to, on the surface level, at least lead to promotion. Now, my point is, I didn't pay any price really. I think my promotions happened even faster because I had made those choices and got noticed faster and better. But I think those small choices for growth, the small choices of saying that I'm not going to be trapped into this, I can only do cost and not quality, I can only do local team, not global team, we can only, all those typical org choices. I think along the way, through making those small choices, I in some way felt I was better prepared for the big choice that I had to make. What I do find is the question for me, very specifically that I asked, came from this realization that at the end of our lives, you rarely regret the things you did. You often regret the things you did not do. And I think that really, when you say in terms of a specific trigger for me, it was, what are these things that I'm choosing to, not do, that I'm going to regret later on, that I didn't say yes to that opportunity.
Thank you for throwing more light on it. Is there anything like the last straw on the camel's back which made the big turn? I mean, something specific, you got out of something where it was big, and then you looked at something else where you have to start all over from zero, in a sense of speaking. Is there a trigger point? I mean, I'm asking this question because these things remain in the mind. People understand these things pretty well, and then they'll be able to connect to it when it comes their personal way.
Again, I'm not sure whether I've answered the question, whether I'm giving the answer that meets your question directly, but the advice that I give to many people who ask me, I very often get calls from former colleagues, friends who are contemplating big choices. The advice I give is, don't shift when you feel you're being pushed, when you feel that, work is so terrible, I have this horrible boss, don't make this kind of a choice because you're being pushed. It must be a pull. I can confess to having this temptation to go into my, second life, as I like to call it, several times when work pressure would get. And one resolution I had made is, I will never make the switch when I'm feeling that I have to run away from this, or I have to. I think that helps to make the decision that I'm being pulled towards something, I'm being called towards something, rather being rather than running away from something. So I would say, again, I'm not sure if I've answered your question, but I would say that's a specific advice I would give to someone who's contemplating a switch, that it shouldn't be a last straw from the push side. If it is, one more deal gone wrong, one more terrible boss, one more promotion that I missed out because of politics in the office, and that's why I've chosen to go down this path of serving the children in Vietnam, or, I think that's a choice that will come back to haunt you because you're making it for the wrong reasons. So I think the choice should be the right choice, and the reasons you're making that choice should also be the right reason.
Thank you. I think you just have, you brought it out, and you have very specifically mentioned that at the time of the big choices, you should not underline it with some other pressures which are coming your way, and that there is a momentum which builds up out of habit formation, out of the way you think, how you create, and then you take what you call a proactive decision rather than a reactive decision.
Absolutely.
Something like the quadrant 2 kind of thing that Stephen Covey talks about. Yeah.
You summarized it as only a management professor could.
Thank you. I mean, here is a question from the audience. I think it's again on the basics of purpose. I mean, he's used good language. So, I'll repeat the question as it is. The perspective is different, but I think the question is the same. The best way to discourage a curious mind is to foist the purpose challenge. Easily is the most unproductive. Fostering a sense of curiosity and sustained by a sense of wonder is the best way forward. Instead of daunting and often unrealistic finding purpose, your views I'd like to listen to. Thank you. The best way to discourage a curious mind is to foist the purpose challenge. Easily the most unproductive. Fostering a sense of curiosity and sustained by a sense of wonder is the best way forward. Instead of the daunting and often unrealistic finding purpose in your views, I'd love to listen to as far as this goes. Thank you.
Again, forgive me if I've not understood the question correctly or not answering it, but let me try and answer it the way that I understood the question. I love the words that you used about curiosity and wonder, because those are some of the casualties of an autopilot journey. I think when we get into autopilot in our careers, as I told you, 1 year into 10 times, when we do that, then we lose that sense of curiosity, we lose that sense of wonder. We kind of are on that treadmill, running very fast, but not very sure whether we're moving ahead. So I think for all of us who are committed to finding purpose in our lives, it's extremely important to retain that sense of curiosity and retain that sense of wonder, because that's what helps us listen to what's going on around us. If we kill curiosity, if we kill wonder, then we stop listening, we stop observing, we stop asking questions. If we continuously keep that antenna open, I think you're able to view what is going on in the world around you, and you're able to ask questions. Why is this happening? What can I do about it? Is there some way that I can make a difference? So I think that's an extremely important quality to have. I would call it the ability to listen and to observe. So for anyone who's wanting a path of purpose, I think being able to listen and observe. The other is, I don't think purpose necessarily has to do with something grandiose. It doesn't have to be that, I'm solving for global poverty. I think purpose comes in us being a great father at home. If I have done justice to being a great father at home or a great son to my parents, purpose isn't very often the small things. Sometimes we kind of go and search for what I will call the grand dream or the grand vision, and we neglect all these small things, and our purpose could be in the small things. So I believe that it doesn't mean that all of us have to leave our jobs and go start NGOs or go do something to live lives of purpose. And I must stress that even when I reflected on my journey, the answer I received for that reflection is that I could very happily have continued in my corporate career and still lived a purposeful life. I still could have. So it was not necessary that I had to make that kind of switch. So I think the purpose thing is an inner compass rather than an outer, what are you doing? And so therefore, it doesn't need to be some grand mission. It's very often in the ordinary, mundane things, but it comes from how you do it, the inner compass with which you do it, which creates that sense of purpose? Are you doing it because it's an intrinsic motivation, or are you doing it because it's external? Are you doing it in a way that you can give to the situation rather than get from the situation? Are you doing it in a manner that contributes to unity rather than sowing, hate and division? So I think those are the simple, ordinary things that so people shouldn't get the idea that purpose means I have to quit my job and go help UNICEF solve for poverty and water shortage and climate change. Right where you are, you can live a life of immense purpose, provided you change the inner compass. I think that's what makes the difference to a life of purpose.
Thank you. I think that's wonderfully responded to. A few things that I could understand. I'm just building on what you have said. I think the first is that about curiosity and wonder are a precursor to purpose.
Yeah.
In the sense that you need to be relaxed and you need to always be looking around to see, and then you need to reflect on it, and then finally other things will start happening. So I think it's very well connected. That's one point. The other thing is that it need not be grandiose, and here the connection I get is to the Mahabharata. I mean, everyone has their own Mahabharata, and I mean, Krishna had a purpose there, and I think each of us also have a purpose. It may not be Mahabharata, it will be Bharata, but it in a sense that that's something that you can connect to, and then look at it and then move forward on that. I think that's also a very, very well well connected point. I think illustrates this whole thing about purpose. Thank you very much. I have one more question in this cluster, and this is about that everyone is different, and then one size does not fit all. Yet there are demand supply issues. I mean, there are very real world practical issues. People want their daily meal, stuff like that. And then how does one go about doing this matchmaking here? I'm sure you have seen this since you handle children as well as you handle people who are going to get into careers. You have seen this. So how do you respond to this question?
And we're talking about when you say demand supply, again, help me understand. I always want to be sure that I've understood correctly before I respond.
Certainly. I mean, demands are there at home. Demands are there in the workplace. There are certain trends. There are certain very basic needs at home. And I have certain things that I bring to the table. And then there is a demand and the supply. And then there is this purpose thing. There is this curiosity thing. Now, how do I match all this?
I think that's a very real challenge. And I think if it isn't there, then there's something wrong. It should be a difficult question to answer. If it's an easy question to answer, I think then our purpose is there's something wrong in the purpose that I'm calling out. I think it is a disturbing question. It is something that should kind of almost make us stop and wonder whether we're doing the right thing. So I do think that tension is an important tension to have. How you reconcile it, I think, goes back to you have to, for example, take the family along. There's no point, somebody saying that I'm going to go ahead and do my purpose thing and neglect their duties at home, or neglect their responsibilities to their husbands, their wives, their children. So that's clearly something which I wouldn't say is a purposeful life if you're choosing to do that. So you have to, I think, in some way ask yourself, how do I bring this and? We spoke about and, Sudhakar. How do I bring the and? Because sometimes we present ourselves with false choices. So as an example, that unless I have this huge corpus, I can never leave my corporate life and go into this purpose life. Now, very often that corpus is built on my wants and not my needs. And if I choose to honestly ask myself, the difference between my wants and needs, I could find that and is possible, that it's not always or. So sometimes I think the trap happens because we present ourselves with false choices, that this is really something that I can never do. Sometimes it's a lack of courage masquerading as family pressure. Very often, in some cases, the family would be fine, but it's a lack of my own courage to make the leap. And therefore, it's convenient for me to say that the family is the reason I'm not doing this, or somebody else is putting pressure on me not to be able to make this leap and do it. So I think it's a question of, definitely it's a difficult question. There should be that tension. Second is asking yourself, how do I bring and into this equation, that we can not get trapped into false choices, and certainly ensuring that you're not doing it at the cost of family, because that will really be more damaging than you doing any good.
Thank you. I think you've quickly given a view about some of the very important dimensions of that question, and I think one point which remains in that mind is about no purpose without duty. No purpose without duty. So
Yeah.
how do you reconcile that with the and was the next step. So you have your duty and you also have your purpose. Again, the Mahabharata connection comes back. And then I think, trying to be very, very level-headed about certain things which are economic as well as psychological, in terms of both wants and needs, where both do come in. Thank you very much. We come to the end of the first cluster. I hand it over to Professor Sudhakar Rao for the next cluster.
Thank you. I think, Mr. Leo, this is going on extremely well. The discussion that started with a framework and then connected with the first cluster of questions in terms of how you have responded and how you have navigated the turn, especially in your own career. We were trying to be very specific in that, and you beautifully answered that. And seemingly a hypothesis that put curiosity against finding purpose has also been very beautifully addressed by you, saying that curiosity is the pathway to actually find your purpose. So beautiful and so intense that it is. In the interest of time, what I will do is now I'll get to the brass tacks. And the larger questions have been answered, or the larger issues have been touched. And there are many more questions coming up on the chat box as well. But what I'll do is, like the way you have advised, we need to do this and. The large versus small. It is not or, but it is and. So we need to connect this. So let me take the small.
Okay.
How does one go about selecting a career choice, especially in your campus when only a few come to the recruitment, that is the campus recruitment process? That's the question.
Yeah, I think on career choice also, I think it boils down to the same things. Traditionally, I went back to my first job example. Traditionally, we would normally gravitate to the better brand company, the higher CTC. I think it's important to ask bigger questions than that. And that goes back to whether I've asked this question, what are my values? And I would urge every young person who's on campus to ask themselves that question, what are my values? And that, I believe, should be something that drives the career decisions. Is this an organization that will help me grow and will help me make an impact? Is this an organization that is aligned with my values? So I would say those are some of the filters. The worst decisions are to make them just purely for money, or make them because everyone's doing it, or this is what will give me social status. This is a name that I can flaunt. Those are, I would say, the short-term decisions that all of us should avoid, whether young people or old. I think those are the wrong reasons to choose a career. I would say that we should choose a career where we are confident that I can grow and I can make a difference on the growth of the organization and the people around me. So any career where those three circles intersect, where you've got passion, proficiency, and purpose, is most likely to be a successful and meaningful career. If a young person finds that these three circles are completely not overlapping, and I'm still choosing that as a career, then that's a red flag, or a yellow flag at least. So I would suggest that if you're able to find that, to those three circles, I would add the fourth circle, or the fourth P of people. Are the people in this organization that I'm joining, are the people in this career likely to share the same values as I do, the same aspirations as I do, or are they completely, offward? So the Enron story is a great example. You had same kind of people gravitating. The lobby of Enron is filled with words like integrity and honesty, but the birds of a feather flock together of the wrong kind. I think the same question is what folk need to ask. Am I joining a place where they're walking the talk on values? Are the people the right kind of people who are aligned with my values? So I would say that the three circle framework is a great filter to apply when making a choice of career. And also to be able to use microscope and telescope. Am I going to be happy in 10 years time doing this? Is it just something that I'm choosing for now as a job, or will I be happy in 10 years time? Will this still excite me in 10 years time choosing this career? So that microscope telescope is the second filter to try and apply.
Great. I think we have come back to the same framework. The alignment of your purpose or your values with the organization that you're going to join is the first and most important way you select an organization. Of course, it is unfair to say that students on campus, while sitting for campus placements and attending the interviews, would go by easy metrics like CTC, easy metrics like what is the size of the organization, how well is the organization known, the brand and the visibility part, and then they make their choice, because there's a huge amount of peer pressure and pressure from back home. They have sent you to a campus, you're supposed to study extremely well and come out in the so-called flying colors. And therefore, those metrics are only understood by your parents, probably understood by your society, and also understood by the people who are competing with you in your campus at that point in time. But it is unfair to say that youngsters who are in the final year cannot make that value judgment, cannot actually look at these three circles. It is unfair to say that. Yeah. So the lesson here for us and also for everyone is to go back to the filter that is provided by these three. And the last one is the people. The fourth P is about people. And in this, in my view, I will share one anecdote very quickly, and then I'll come back to the next small question. I had this interview with ICFAI Group with my esteemed founder who passed away in 2011. But before that, I had a small interaction of 70 minutes, 70. And he just allowed me to speak. And like a kid, I spoke many things. And then he said one thing. And that was the turning point. He said, your kind of people are here. I mean, you have very nicely brought it up, and emotionally I'm connecting it to my discussion with our founder. He said, your kind of people are here. He meant that in my previous organization, my kind of people were not there probably. And then he was more importantly pitching that this organization would have a greater alignment with your thinking, so on and so forth. Thank you so much. So now I would go to the second question on this is, in the journey of the campus to corporate, what are the three employability skills the students should focus on?
Okay, that's a big question, but to be able to choose three things, I would say one is having a true sense of self-confidence and self-worth is an important first quality to have. What ends up happening with a lot of young people is we have wrong ideas about confidence. We have wrong ideas about, who's successful. So we end up using a job or a career to fill those holes. And I think it's extremely important for a young person to have a healthy sense of self-worth. Because once you have a healthy sense of self-worth, then you're going out into the world with an intention to give rather than to fill holes. I need approval, I need all those things. So I would say that is one key skill to be able to have as a foundation, a healthy sense of self-worth. I think in today's rapidly changing what we call the VUCA world, empathy and emotional intelligence, I would say, rank extremely high as an employability skill, independent of what industry you choose or what career you choose. What is needed a lot more in today's world is that ability to connect, because you're dealing with people from different countries, from different backgrounds. There are so many crises that happen. We had COVID, and I think most leaders who navigated the COVID crisis best were the ones that had a higher, what I will call radical empathy or high emotional intelligence. And third, I would say, is not so much on the skill side, but the strong sense of values. Because again, we're talking about VUCA, where everything is changing fast, chaos, uncertainty, ambiguity. You need a North Star, a compass, that I will do the right thing by people, that I will, not take shortcuts, that I will, be prepared to take on a tough assignment because it means growth. So I think that strong sense of values of gratitude, respect, integrity, honesty, patience, those I think become an extremely important foundation to have. So just top of my mind, I would pick those three for now, which is a strong sense of self-worth, emotional intelligence and empathy, and a strong value system.
Actually, they are not three, they are many. But
Yes.
you have bucketed them into three.
Yes.
A very healthy sense of your self-worth is very difficult to cultivate and very difficult to practice. And I'm sure if they have right teachers and if they have right people that they encounter, luckily, then I'm sure they'll be able to discover that. Yes, and that empathy and EQ, which defines leadership wherever it is, at every level of leadership, the unassailable single most factor that determines leadership is empathy and the EQ. So therefore, that's extremely important, and the value matrix that you have told us. But there are several layers which you mentioned there. It is not 3, but there are 10. Now, from here, I will switch on to another question, which is also simple, is that we have noticed, as you also have mentioned earlier, that there's a quick burnout. Executives, they get on to the journey of corporate careers. They do extremely well. They go by the metrics, and there's a quick retirement probably. So which means that there's a quick burnout and a quick retirement. What do you suggest should the road ahead for such young executives? We have, just for your information, on an average, 4 to 6 years of WOCEX is the profile of the person who is attending this leadership conversation. And it is going to be extremely useful if you can suggest a few tips on how do we avoid a burnout and how do we avoid a quick retirement.
I think, going back to the point about listening and observing, if I'm experiencing burnout and fatigue, that's something that my body is telling me. It's a sign. It's a signal that the body is telling me, that my mind is telling me, that I should listen to. And burnout and fatigue can come for various reasons. I mean, one big reason could be the whole theme of this webinar, that I'm living a life with a lack of purpose, and that could be one reason. Another could be just that, I've not developed the skills to handle, stress management, time management, people management. So it could completely be in the proficiency circle. But I would say what is important to do when you're facing burnout and fatigue is to ask yourself, okay, this is a symptom. What is the root cause behind this symptom? I think that is the important question. We shouldn't just treat burnout and fatigue as a root cause. That is merely a symptom. We should ask ourselves, why am I experiencing this? Why am I experiencing at this time in my life? And maybe that's a purpose-related question. So maybe the answer is, yes, I'm living a purposeless life and therefore I'm experiencing burnout. But it would also be as simple as, I'm messing up my people relationships at work, or I'm doing a terrible job of prioritization and I need to get better at that. So I would say asking the why to that question of burnout and fatigue is important. Definitely having purpose creates the stamina for the marathon. When you have purpose, I think it gives you energy. It gives you, an enthusiasm that doesn't come from, let's say, a non-purpose life. For example, I still work, 16-hour days sometimes, or, an 18-hour day sometimes, just as I would do in my old past corporate life. But maybe in my old past corporate life, when my head hits the pillow, I would say that, I've negotiated clauses 15 to 25 during this long day that I spent. And that isn't very meaningful to me. But maybe today it has got to do with the fact that I've made an impact with some young people, and that creates some meaning, doesn't leave me tired and fatigued, but charged up for the next day. So I would suggest that don't treat burnout and fatigue as purely a purpose thing. It could also be something very, very simple that you can fix in the proficiency circle. The important thing is to be alert to it and to listen to it and to do something about it. To just ignore it and say, I'm just going to carry on and soldier and, grit my way. I think we're just being blind to something that our body and our mind is telling us to notice.
Oh, great. That's a fantastic answer. The burnout could be a symptom, whereas the root cause could be a disalignment with the purpose. Or if you didn't have a purpose, probably find that and see where you're actually going on. That's fantastic. You laid it out so clearly and so vastly and openly for us. It was so fantastic to listen to that answer. Thank you very much. And now what I'll do is, the clock strikes 7:51, and probably we can take one more small cluster. Professor Prasad, if he's in agreement with me, we will take one small cluster, because this is a very important cluster of questions that we have. There's always this which I'm trying to do again, the and factor. We ask the big questions, we ask the brass tacks. Again, we go back to some relevant domains as well. I think about campus cluster, I request Professor Prasad to start.
Thank you, Professor Rao. I think I'll start with the, the last bit that you said, that purpose creates stamina for the marathon. And here we are talking about trying to find out the energy source somewhere. And I remember the last slide that you put about what you thought, what you believed in, and that there is a purpose and that there is a mission and there is something for you. And this is about finding and connecting to that, for lack of better words, I'm using the word energy source. If you reflect on what's happening in education today, and here I'll take on higher education because it's far more specific. Do you think it is, the question goes that, is it too convergent? Is it sufficiently divergent to meet the realities of life? Solving real world problems as well as solving our own problems, personal purpose related problems. So this is where the question comes from.
So now you've hit a raw spot. so I think I must go back to the first tagline that we put on our website, which was a quote from Mark Twain, that I never let my schooling interfere with my education. So I think in many ways, the education system as we know it, it would be how do I put this, a gross tragedy if education merely prepared students for employment. I think we should not. I think partly the education system of this era emerged from the industrial age, where the responsibility of schooling and higher education was seen as preparing people for work. And I think if we only focused on that, giving people employability skills, we are really doing a great injustice to young people. We haven't taught them how to deal with stress. We haven't taught them how to deal with each other. We haven't taught them how to deal with technology. And then we roll them out with certifications and degrees to go and get jobs. So I do think all of us in education need to ask ourselves whether we are giving young people everything they need beyond just the academic side of it. Are we teaching them to collaborate? Are we teaching them, we spoke about self-worth. Are we teaching them to adapt when things go wrong? Are we teaching them to accept criticism and failure? I think one of the things that our education system always does a terrible job is that right from schooling all the way till university, we convey to young people a negative attitude about failure. We convey a negative attitude about mistakes, whether it's the red marks that are used in our early school all the way to, missed credits or what's the term? I forget the term. So there is a negative connotation to failure and mistakes. Whereas all of us know in life that failure is merely a part of the process. It's something that and the education system doesn't prepare us for that. So I would say the reflection that we need to do is to ask ourselves that education needs to prepare us not just for work, but also for life. Will the young people who pass out of our institution, will they be happy? Will they be fulfilled? Will they be able to make an impact? Will they be able to run happy families? Will they be good husbands, wives, parents, children? So I think our responsibility needs to go beyond just asking ourselves whether they'll get a good job with a good company and have the skills for that. So it's of course a very large problem to solve for, but I think it begins with us as educators asking ourselves what is the purpose of our education system. So the big question that we have been asking ourselves in this webinar, since education has given ourselves the wrong answer so far, I think has led to our current approach. But if we keep asking ourselves the question, what is the purpose of this institution? If it is to prepare them for work and life, then I think it will lead to a lot of change in what we do and how we interact with students.
Thank you. I think you've put the big picture there. And here we come to a very practical question that institutions face, including progressive institutions. And this is about, right now, given the very high economic pressure that is faced by students, as well as the institutions need to ensure that students find a job. Placements is there on all websites, it's there on all rankings. And if you don't have a good placement, rate, then it means something else. So right now there is a pressure from the institution side on the faculty to include employability, as we call it, into the curriculum. Now we're talking about another dimension which comes in, which is even more important. We're talking about maybe citizenship, or including the person's individual sense, individual, how he acts as an individual. So these also need to be loaded on to what you call the curriculum. Curriculum in the sense, not just the curriculum which is academic, but the full period that the student spends with the institution. Now, how can institutions and faculty, what kind of methods do you suggest for institutions, higher education institutions and faculty to implement this tripod?
So one is, I think there is no dichotomy. I think institutions should not feel that, again, one is at the expense of the other. I don't think we need to fall into the trap that if I am teaching employability skills, I can't prepare for this. It is a question of institutions telling ourselves that this is a priority. So I may still be doing my management class. I'll give you an example of a redesigned classroom that we have done in one of the colleges that we work with. We simply did something as simple as changing the layout of the classroom. So the students work and study the whole year in as much of a collaborative environment. So it's not the classroom layout. It's little pods of collaborative learning which is taking place, where the students take ownership for their learning. It's a small tweak, but I think the curriculum is still being covered. But at the same time, you're teaching students to collaborate, to own their learning, to be able to think critically from simple changes that can be made. So I don't think what we're proposing is that there will be a parallel curriculum. I don't think it's as difficult as that. It really is a question of prioritization. If all of us as faculty can understand that this is a priority, and I can share with you a brief exercise that I did through my own career, looking at, let's look at employment success the way we define it, the placement success the way we define it. And I'm going back to all the people that I had promoted through different points in my career. Rarely had it to do with a typical employment skill. It most often had to do, when you promoted somebody, it most often had to do with what we traditionally call soft skills, but a character strength, not the competence strength. It was very often a character strength that pushed somebody up, and very often something that pulled somebody else down was a character flaw. It had nothing to do with how competent they were in their job. It had to do with their inability to get along with people, or their inability to take criticism, or their inability to let go of responsibility. So those things, I would suggest that in education we tell ourselves those are real things. They are not devoid from placement success. They are not distended from getting a high CTC. They are as important. So practically, I would suggest that all of us as educators ask ourselves, what can we do in our regular classrooms while we are covering the curriculum, while we are covering it? What can I do to in the approach, in the way I'm designing the classroom, in the way I teach, that will bring these skills into play, that will bring these character pieces into play, so that the students are prepared for both. So I don't think it is necessarily a win-lose type of thing, that if I spend more time on this, I will lose time on this.
Excellent. I think you hit the nail on the head. And there is this component, there is this kind of a basic design issue which exists. As you put it, it's a design issue. Yes. It's about a completely new paradigm. Your outcomes are the same. Call it BPR or call it design. Yeah. I think you're talking about taking a zero budget and then seeing how you can put it the way you want towards the the outcomes. And I think that's something that institutions, because this is a fantastic change, institutions will need to learn, because there is already a certain treadmill and a momentum on which they are going, and then,
and more importantly, unlearn.
Yes, absolutely unlearn. So wonderful. I think you've come across at the source, and you've given a direction in terms of what is the criticality of how you start the journey. And I think once that put into place, whether it's an individual faculty or it's a group of faculty or it's the institution, I think that's the way to do it.
I think an additional point that all educational institutions, whether it's schooling or policy or college, one thing we often neglect is we neglect the child or student. We often think of everybody else. We think of the employer, we think of the parents, we think of the staff, but very rarely is an education system geared around, the child. I was recently working with a school and they were doing a satisfaction survey. They had questionnaires for everybody. They had questionnaires for the parents, they had questionnaires for the staff, they had questionnaires for, but not a single questionnaire for the children in the school. So I think that's partly what will help educational institutions revisit their frameworks. If we can really get back to putting the child or the student at the center, then I think there's a lot of rethinking that will automatically happen.
Thank you. I think, you connected to the other framework that we have, this knowing, doing, being. And then this knowing and doing is something that we machine it. And then this being is completely ignored. Wonderful, wonderful way of connecting. Thank you. Thank you very much. I think those are my two questions in the cluster. I hand it back to Professor Rao.
This is great. We are closer to the 8 p.m. Deadline that we have, but then I'm going to make one violation again. That is, I'm inviting any participant who would like to open their mic and ask the question, which has not already been asked. This is open to you.
Hi, sir. This is Lakshman, sir.
Yeah, Dr. Lakshman, welcome. Please ask.
Yeah, thanks, sir.
Good evening.
Sir, yes, sir. I made a comment in the group. So, which did you get a chance or not to look at it?
I'm so sorry. I've been focused on
no
this
problem, sir. No problem.
not,
You didn't look at it because you have it already. So everybody else look at it. So that was fantastic, and I loved it. Your communication is so fantastic that everybody can able to understand, even the people who are not concentrating on your voice. It is coming to our room and getting into our ears and mind. So yes, sir. My question is, you said purpose will definitely lead. Purpose means, in other way, it's a goal, setting up a goal. How strongly we will set up a goal will change the mind of a person for sure. If we have employees in the office, 80% of the people are one side and 20% people will be on one side. Only because of those 20%, the companies will go forward. Right? It's an open truth in the world as of now going on, right? So my question is, when we compare those 80 people, how strong, if those 80 people set up their goal or purpose, how strongly they can set up a goal where their mindset would change.
No, thank you, sir. Thank you again. Very gracious of you. I really appreciate your point. And to your question, one is, I would suggest that purpose is bigger than goal. I mean, purpose is beyond goal, because I think once your purpose is decided, then you could have goals within that. But I think the purpose question is a bigger question for young people to ask. In organizations, as you just rightly put it now, there is the challenge that you have a vast majority that can sometimes be disengaged. So I think it is important for us as organizations to hire for purpose. So very often we hire for competencies, we hire for proficiencies. We rarely look to see whether this person's purpose is closely aligned with ours. I will only use the example of Talentees. We have been blessed from day one with people who joined us whose purpose was very aligned, because I've always asked folk, do you have a heart for young people? If you don't have a heart for young people, I can't fix that. All the other things we can work on. We can train, we can teach you things, we can do all those things. But if you don't have a heart for young people, and that's where I come back to the purpose. So in my experience, at least when we're trying to build an organization that will create an impact, we should hire people whose purpose is aligned with ours, not just their proficiencies. The more we are able to do that, the bigger the engine, the purpose engine that will drive our organization. When we have people who just have the proficiency but don't have that inner compass, then after a time they can become, just cruising along, and sometimes even a toxic or destructive influence. To people who are already there, I would suggest that our role as leaders is to help everybody align purpose. Very often as organizations, we are guilty of not always living out our purpose. We say something, we do something else. So employees also are confused. They don't know whether you're living your slogan or you're doing something else. So I think as leaders, Our job should be able to clarify purpose and to tell people, okay, this is what we exist for. We're not talking about our branding tagline. We're not talking about our marketing slogan. This is why we exist. This is the reason we exist. Have you bought into this? And it's important to get everyone together to ask themselves that question. Does this resonate with you? Are you prepared to contribute to make a difference? So I would suggest that's a leadership problem, that we have to ask ourselves that question and get that the individual purpose aligned with the organizational purpose as much as possible. Even if it's not perfect, if we as leaders make an effort to communicate that purpose, not just by what we say, but by what we do, then I think employees will find it easier to fine-tune their own compasses.
Great
So
stuff.
fantastic. Yeah,
Great
that's a
stuff. Thank
fantastic answer. So I definitely, I'm happy and convinced.
Thank you very much. I think that is a fantastic response to what the organizations and the bigger entities are supposed to do and plan that alignment when they're actually hiring. And also subsequently, they should put it in practice. As you mentioned that several brand taglines are in variance with what actually they do on the ground. So an advertising agency or a branding agency which works with that organization will tell them that, is it true, is it believable, and is it what actually you do on the ground? And otherwise, don't put it on your tagline, or don't put it on the around your logo, something like that. There is a sweet shop in Hyderabad which says, "We are always with you." I mean, it is so vague and it is so vacant and empty that it can fit into any situation, and at the same time, it doesn't mean anything. So are we going to be those sweet shops who are trying to have very good catchy taglines and general and fitting all sizes kind of taglines, or actually we get down to practicing what we believe and translate that purpose into credible action? I think several organizations, when they do woke advertising, it is seen whether they're trying to signal something, whether they're trying to actually garner attention, or it is in alignment with their own deeply believed, entrenched purpose that is now coming in terms of advertising. When you stoke controversies, these questions will be asked. Is it advertising just for the sake of advertising, or it is their purpose that is really seen? Without this advertisement, were they on ground practicing those principles that they are preaching through this advertisement? So that was the question that is generally asked. Thank you, sir. I think we have come to the end, but then there is one interesting question asked by Mr. Navneet. He can open his mic and ask the question also, but let me state it here. How do we prepare people to deal with failure, which is a part of professional life? Mr. Navneet, would you like to come in?
I'm in a noisy place, Professor, so...
Okay.
Hi, Navneet. Good evening. Thank you for being here and for your question. Yeah, so to answer the question, I think one is, I believe there are wrong definitions of success and failure. So I think the first thing is to be able to educate young people that success and failure have to be redefined. I think that's the first way, because if you can prepare them to redefine it, most often our success and failure conditions are based on what other people think and what other people feel. If we can reorient that to, how do I define it? What it means for me. So I remember this New York Times article, if I recall right, which said failure is not a bug. Failure is not a bug. And one management school in the US that was celebrating failure, where there was failure week, where students were putting up times that they had failed, staff were putting up times that they had failed and how they learned from those mistakes. So I think the best way to prepare young people is to help them see failure as part of the success process, that it really is how you grow through times that things don't work out, through times that you fail. Second, I think, is emotionally preparing young people. I think it's a very different message for a young person when he tells himself, I failed in this, versus I am a failure. Which is generally what young people tend to do. If they have failed in something, the takeaway is I am a failure. And I think it's important to help young people distinguish between those, that failing in a test or failing in a job interview does not mean that you are a failure. I often give Jack Ma's example, almost 20 or 30 interviews that he attended where he was never picked by the interview committee. And one place where I think there were 24 people who attended, 23 were selected and he wasn't selected. Now, if he had gone on to tell himself that he's a failure because of that, we wouldn't have had the Jack Ma of today. So I think the best way is to give young people these two paths. Redefine what you think about success and failure, and create the emotional strength to deal with that yeah, I'm not a failure, that having failed in something means that I'm just better prepared for the success that will follow.
Great. Thank you very much, sir, for this answer. And thank you, Mr. Navneet, for this wonderful question. So, ladies and gentlemen, we have come to an exciting end of an exciting session that we have had with Mr. Leo Fernandez today. I think it is quite profound. It is quite a vast subject, actually. There are specifics and there are generalizations as well, but very beautifully interlaced with some of the anecdotes and his own personal lessons and experiences of working across 2 decades of his work experience in India and abroad. So that's a fantastic thing. Mr. Leo, you have invoked several management gurus and leaders in your talk. You started with Jim Collins with the 3 circles of purpose, passion, and the proficiency, and laid so much of importance on the purpose, because purpose gives you the stamina to run this journey of your career. In fact, to run this journey of life in itself. Purpose does not have to be something grandiose. It can be very simple, and it can mean a lot to the people around you, and that would be your purpose. And everyone's purpose need not be as big and as lofty as it sounds. There are tough decisions that you have suggested us to take, and those tough decisions, or the switch, will have to be made on the inner calling, or generally what they call it as the pull, rather than the push. And push usually happens because of a wrong experience or a bad experience with your own boss, or because of the politics in the office, or because of a deal that has gone wrong, or even because of a mistake that you would have made, that you will start running away from a situation. And that doesn't make a meaningful switch for you. But that switch which is meaningful is one which is based on the pull, the inner calling, and the alignment or the discovery of the purpose itself. You have also invoked Peter Drucker, how to discover your own purpose in terms of knowing yourself so beautifully. And it was so nice to listen to you when you connected these dots from Jim Collins to Peter Drucker, to even Clayton Christensen, when you said that 100% of the times you can stick to your principles. It is very easy than sticking to 98% of the times. That is, when you hit the road of the purpose, the consistency will come in, and then it is very difficult to actually not move away from that very purpose. You also invoked Gandhiji when you highlighted the principle of giving, that is, give versus get. I think so beautifully you have narrated those things. Thank you very much for this, but I should not forget the inspiration that you have drawn from Dr. V of Arvind Eye Hospitals. I think that's a beautiful way you have inserted the lessons that you have picked up, or the impressions that you have carried from Dr. V. So nice that you have blended it with Indian leaders, both of historical nature and also people with corporate background, connected the purpose with the leaders that you have quoted from abroad as well. Thank you very much. This session has been wonderful. I hope all of us have enough to take away, and all of us have tried to at least now sit down. Even the people in mid-career, people in careers which are past 2 decades, all of them can actually reflect on these and try and make a meaningful switch from here on, or at least consolidate their path, or at least make sure that they are on the right path already. So thank you very much, Mr. Leo, for this wonderful session. I'm sure all the members and participants have enjoyed. Some of their comments are in the chat box. I will send it across to you by email. We'll also send you the recording once we catch up on Monday. We will be able to get that recording a little bit edited in terms of the gaps and the noises here and there, but then we'll share the recording. We will also put this recording along with a well-drafted summary of takeaways on our archives on Online MBA website. So all the participants and everyone can go back to that. The links we will share with you, and we have the learnings kept right up there forever. Learning is forever. And sometimes we have wonderful leaders like Mr. Leo who come in and share their lessons with us. And today has been one such great session. 29th webinar in our series of what we call Wise Views has been truly lived up to its name, Wise Views. Thank you very much, Mr. Leo, for delivering this session. And ladies and gentlemen, yes, on behalf of Professor Prasad, our Honorable Vice Chancellor, and all the members at ICFAI Group, I thank all the participants for patiently listening to this session and sharing your questions that helped us not just go over these questions normally, but also there has been a sense of debate a little bit, a sense of reflection, and a sense of thorough discussion that we have had. It is all because of you. Stay tuned. We will meet again on the next Friday at 6:30 p.m. on this webinar series. Thank you, ladies and gentlemen. Have a good evening.